Hello, this is Beth from Around the Table Yarns. Tonight is the first session of our last sock club of 2025. We are beginning the Stony Stream sock from Stephen West. We contacted Stephen West and he actually sent us a video. So if you hang on for a second, I will see if I can get that loaded up.
That you're a reputable shop and you're going to make sure people pay, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
you
we
can't
do.
you can't pick up things off the off like that one page of half of a pattern anyway.
Exactly. Well, and I think we reach out to the designers and we explain what Sock Club is and how it started during the pandemic, and that we are really just trying to help people access these patterns and succeed with them, and that we charge for the patterns and we do our very best not to show, um, you know, too much of the pattern on the video because we do encourage people to go ahead and buy the pattern as well. Okay, anyway, Stephen West had some nice things to say. I think that it didn't get into the recording, so I'm going to maybe edit the end of this to add it to the end of the recording for people who are watching later. So let's go ahead and do some of our work today. Again, I have this list of things that I want to demonstrate, and I want to get started with that. I have a new web camera. I'm hoping it works well. What did I had a little light here and my light's gone missing. Hello, where's my light? Um, there's a little bit of light. So here's my hands. I just want to talk about that. There is a video. I want to just cover some things that are in the pattern. So the Stony Stream socks look like this, and they are a combination of um, garter stitch and a little bit of slip stitching and a little bit of cabling to create this fun pattern. And it's it's a 12 row repeat. I'm sorry that that doesn't seem to be, I love it. It focused for a second and I don't seem to be able to get it to focus now. I'm very frustrated. I just went out and got a new camera. Um, the Stony Stream socks are slip stitch work with garter stitch interspersed with stockinette with a little bit of cabling. Again, he said you can make the ribbing or the leg as long or as short as you choose to. That is what we're going to be focusing on tonight. Tonight is the 6th. November 3rd, we will be doing the gusset and the heel turn and the gusset, and then getting started on the foot. And then December 1st, we will be concentrating on shaping and finishing the toe. Those tend to be sort of the same class over and over again, but it's, I think, important to finish your socks. So that's the plan for this project. I am going to just show you, even though it's a little blurry, that in the pattern here, if you have the pattern and you are looking, there are links to, if you want to use DPNs, if you want to use Magic Loop, if you want to buy a kit, if you want to watch his workshops. And then here, if you want to see his German twisted cast on, I am going to demonstrate this right now, but I just want to point out that throughout the pattern, there are a lot of things to help you. So let's start with the cast on for this. So when we do a long tail cast on, and the German twisted cast on is a long tail cast on, I'm going to demonstrate it on a double pointed needle. I always want to leave a tail, and you can see my needle is about 8 inches long. I want to leave a tail about 6 inches long. So this is for me to weave in later. And then leaving the tail to one side and working using the working yarn to estimate the length of your tail. I want you to take the working yarn and wrap it 10 times around the needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. and then you unwrap it. That length is enough for 10 stitches. So if you are casting on 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, all you need to do is walk off that length, 10, 20, 30, 40. I'm casting on for the second size, so I need 40. Or sorry, I'm casting on for the second size, I need 70. So I would walk this off 7 times. And then that would be the point where I would pinch and it becomes my turn for my long tail cast on. Now, for the purpose of this, I'm only going to cast on a few. The next thing I want you to do is know that there's a tail side that's attached to nothing. It's just attached to the tail. And then there's the working yarn side. And depending on how long your tail is, you might want to create a bobbin for it. And this helps prevent it untwisting as you're making a lot of stitches with a long tail cast on. So if you're casting on more than 20 or 30 stitches, then you might want to do this trick. So using the tail side, you want to open up your fingers and make a butterfly. So I'm wrapping around the tail. And what I want to do is get it so that with my tail, I can create a backwards loop and put it over the butterfly and tighten it up. I'm looking at the camera to make sure I'm on the camera. All right, tighten that up. And then I do it again. This is also a way, if you're doing color work, of creating a bobbin to self bobbin. And the reason we do it working towards the tail is that as you need this yarn, you're able to just pull it right out. And I won't do that just yet. I'll show you as I cast it on. So we put that bobbin over our thumb. And we put the working yarn over our finger. And we make a triangle like that. Okay, so we have the bobbin side over my thumb and the working yarn side over my pointer finger, and we grasp those together. So my lower fingers make a triangle. And then I don't start with a slip knot. I just take my needle and I go into this area here against the working yarn and I twist it once. And that makes my first stitch. Now, in a normal long-tailed cast on, I just want to show some steps of the normal long-tail cast on. I want you to imagine, well, the way that I normally teach it is to say go to the base of your thumb and run the needle up. But we can also think about going to like 6 o'clock on the clock and going up to 12, going from 12 o'clock down to 6, and then from 12 o'clock down to 6 again. So here's my first stitch, and now here's my second stitch. There's a loop on my thumb, and a lot of times when I watch people do this, they let go of everything to pull on this loop. And I want to just encourage you to leave your finger and the other yarn in place, to just remove your thumb from that loop and put it against the front strand and gently bring that front strand forward. And then you're back in position to do the next step. So I just want you to think about doing that. And the other thing I want you to think about doing is putting your finger over your finished stitch to space it out from the next stitch. So when I make my next stitch, so I go again to the base of my thumb and up, to the tip of my finger and down, to the tip of my thumb and down. There's my next stitch, and I've got my finger spacing it apart from the stitch next to it. I remove my thumb and gently pull on that. And then I want to move my finger to the next spot. So this is called the long tail cast on with spacing. And I just recently did a workshop with Cecilia Campochiaro, who does sequence knitting, reversible knitting, and marls. And she recommended doing this. Patty Lyons recommends doing this. And so I am going to be recommending doing this. What it does is it creates a little bit more room, a little bit more elasticity in your cast on. And so as you're doing your cast on, I want you to think about using your finger to space out. See how I'm spacing it out? And then you can move it up. Now, as I use up my bobbin, I can pull on it. I can pull on it, or I can't. And it will come out and still stay in the bobbin below. So that's the point of doing that little butterfly bobbin. Okay, so that's the long tail cast on with spacing and with a bobbin. Now, the German twisted cast on is based on this, and I want you to see that I'm going to go from 3 o'clock on my hand. So think of these two strands, this loop on my thumb, as on the face of a clock. And I want to go from, 9 o'clock under both strands to 3 o'clock, from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock, and then over to the other strand on my pointer finger, and I want to go from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. And that picks up, this is going to be my new stitch, and I want to come through, but you can see that there's an X in on my thumb, on the loop on my thumb. This is where the twist comes in. So what I do, there's a couple of things you can do. What I normally do is I bend my thumb to open up that twist, and then I bring my needle through it. And again, you want to be keeping this spacing as you do that. So here I've brought my stitch through. You can see that there's a twist on my thumb. I'm going to take my thumb out of the loop and then go gently forward to bring that stitch closed. And I keep my hands in position. So again, it's from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, from noon to 6, from noon to 6, and then I bend my thumb, sort of like I'm making finger guns, and that lets me go through that opening. And then you keep your finger there, move your thumb out of position and go there. So that's giving me some nice even spacing between my stitches. Another way you can do it is look for the triangle at the base and come through that and make your stitch around and through, over, and I like to come through that way. So that's the German twisted. I've learned another one recently, and just for the sake of being thorough, I'm going to show you my most favorite one right now. This is the Austrian twisted. So the same things apply. You're holding your hands, the yarn is positioned in the same way, but this time you're going to go to the outside strand of the loops on your finger, on your thumb and your finger. So first you go to the thumb and you pick up that loop. Then you go to the outside to 3 o'clock on the loop on your pointer finger and you pick up, and there's your stitch, and it comes straight through the loop on your thumb. So what's different about this is you now have two loops, one on your thumb and one on your finger. So you slide your finger and your thumb out of both of their loops. It's just a little bit fiddlier right there, but it allows you to make these stitches without that funny twist. And it's still a twisted cast on. So that's the Austrian twisted cast on. And I'm still trying to space those out as I make them. The difference between them is really at the base of the stitches. And the Austrian cast on has more, these three here at the end have more of a braided appearance. And I think that the German twisted has more of a beaded appearance, and the long tail cast on is a little bit smoother. But again, to make your cast on as elastic as possible, I think spacing out between your stitches and not just um, crushing them up against each other will help give you the most elastic edging that you can get. So I just want to recommend that. Any questions about the long tail cast on, the German twisted, or the Austrian twisted? The only other thing I want to point out is you can do the reverse for any of them by treating the loops on your finger the way that you treat the loops on your thumb, so that if you want to do something purlwise, you can do it by reversing your actions. It's easiest to reverse the actions, I think, for the Austrian, because you would just do that to make a stitch purlwise. So if you wanted to cast on in a knit one, purl one rib, or a knit two, purl two rib, you could. Okay, so that's the cast on. Once you have cast on, the next thing in line is to do a gauge swatch. And the issue with doing a gauge swatch, again, we had a little conversation about this before we started the recording, and the issue is it worth doing a gauge swatch? Because usually you'd want to do a gauge swatch of about 40 stitches or up to 40 stitches for a sock. And you'd want to do it in the same technique that you are knitting the sock. So a sock is worked in the round. You would want to work your gauge swatch in the round. And it's hard to do a gauge swatch in the round when you don't have enough stitches to go all the way around. So we have a way to do that, and it involves casting on a set number of stitches. And ideally, it would be more than this. It would be 40 if you're using sock yarn generally. In this pattern, they have a stockinette gauge given for 32 stitches equaling 4 inches when it's blocked. And if you're doing the gauge swatch in pattern, 44 stitches will be 4 inches when blocked. So you could cast on either 32 or 48 stitches to do your swatch. I personally think apples to apples, the best estimate of something is not when you're learning a new pattern stitch. So if they give you a gauge in stockinette of 32 stitches to 4 inches block, that's 8 stitches to the inch. I would go ahead and just do it in stockinette. Unless you really want to practice the pattern ahead of time, I would not do the gauge. I would not do two things at once. I would not practice my pattern and swatch for gauge at the same time. Although it's always good to practice your pattern. So to do a gauge swatch in the round, I'm literally going to just not turn my stitches. So normally if I got to the end of this row, I would turn and my working yarn would be on the right-hand side. And I would take my working yarn and I would work across that row. But when we want to do something imitating or mimicking our knit stitches, we only ever knit from this side of our stitches. So when you're working in the round, you're always coming in a circle back around to this side of the stitches. So when you do a swatch in the round, that's all you need to do. You need to pull. So if you're doing a swatch that's supposed to be 4 inches, make sure you pull over at least 4 inches of yarn, and you're going to loop that behind. And however you knit, you want to take, the spot where you are and make your stitch, leaving the loop on the back side. and you just work so all of those stitches are knitted. The edge stitches tend to be a little bit looser. And so as you're doing this, if you want to sort of tighten them up, one of the things you can do is to knit into the back of the first and last stitches. So I'm going to just knit into the back of that stitch. Okay, so I come off. I've freed my other needle back up. I have my stitches, my second row has been knitted only. And now I want to loop at least 4 inches back over, push my stitches back to the other side of my needle. So if I was working on a circular needle or double pointed needles, I would just move them without turning the needle. This is the hardest part. Without turning the needle, move them back to the other side where there is no working yarn. Carry the working yarn over so that there's a 4-inch or more loop. Hold that behind the stitch as you make your first stitch, and then resume normal knitting. So, and again, we want to make that first stitch into the back loop to help secure it. It will still be a little bit loose, and then you're going to knit normally across the rest of them. And you just keep doing that until you've gone at least 3 or 4 inches of stockinette stitch. You want to do 3 or 4 inches because your cast on and the stitches on your needle distort the gauge a little bit. So you want to be at least an inch or two away from the cast on and an inch or two away from the needle, which means you need to be about 3 inches, at least 3 inches tall or 4 inches tall to have a space far enough away from the beginning and the end to give you a better accurate estimate of your gauge. So I would keep doing that until it was this long. And then you would bind off in pattern, whatever pattern you're doing. And then you would soak it and let it dry. Soak it completely, pat or roll out the excess fluid from it, and then let it dry, and then measure across the center of it to be able to tell if you've gotten gauge. If you like the fabric that you get, but you don't get gauge exactly, that can help you decide if you want to make a different size of the sock. So for example, if instead of getting 8 stitches to the inch, you get 9 stitches to the inch or 7 stitches to the inch or some fraction of the stitches to the inch, you can evaluate the sizes that are offered and what your gauge is and make a decision from there. And if you want more information about that, call the shop because that's more than tonight's class can cover. Okay, so that's how to make a gauge swatch in the round. I'm going to put that back over there for now. Getting set up to do socks, I often talk about doing magic loop. And I wanted to demonstrate both magic loop or working on circular needles. And of course, I've gotten my samples here are all confused. Go. Get over there. Okay, so I'm going to start with double points. When you are making socks on double pointed needles, it's not a bad idea to have half of your stitches on one needle and a quarter on 2 needles so that you're working on 3 needles and then using a 4th needle to do each row or to do each section. Once you've cast on, so here I've cast on 24 stitches for my demonstration. Once you've cast on that many stitches, then what you can do is slide the stitches to the end. Either end will work. And actually, I'm going to say slide the non-working yarn side, so the side that doesn't have anything attached to it, and you're going to slip half the stitches first. So you're going to slip as though to purl half of the stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That puts half of your stitches there. And then take another double pointed needle and slide half of the remaining stitches. In this case, that will be 6. 6. With 3 needles involved, you can now make a triangle and you can work in the round. So I like to set them, because I don't want them dangling or twisting or whatever. I like to set them on the table and get them in position. Whoop. And what I'm looking at is that all of the stitches are on the inside of my needles, that I have the correct number on each needle. And, I'm going to slip that over. My working yarn should be on, I always think of this as a little rectangle, and this is the back right-hand corner of my rectangle. So my tail and my working yarn, because I did the long tail cast on, is in the back right-hand corner of my little rectangle. So I want to make sure I get the working yarn and not the tail. And I'm going to take a whole nother needle. So I'll have 4 total. And then I'm just going to be working on the first half of the stitches. So the reason I did this where I slipped off the first half and then the 2 is once you get these in position, this could be the top of your foot. And this can be the bottom of your foot. And you can work, and then you'll be able to tell, because the top of your foot is always half of the stitches, and that's true throughout the sock. And the bottom half of the foot will increase in the number of stitches, and that's true throughout the sock. So this would be the middle of the bottom half of the foot, and this would be the halfway point of the sock. So I just think that that's convenient. Also, Elfrida likes to do it on 4 needles total. So three needles holding and a 4th one working. And the reason is the needles crossed like that are less likely to slide out than if you work in quarters and you have them arranged like that. If there's any looseness in the stitches, those needles, when they're perpendicular to the floor or when they're pointing towards the floor, can slide out. And I have a lot of problems with my socks falling out, with my needles falling out, which is why I mostly do magic glue. So I'm going to take the working yarn and now I'm going to join these in the round. So I'm just going to put my needle in place at the first stitch. So this is the first stitch I cast on. And I'm going to grab my working yarn, so I make sure that it's attached to the ball and not to the tail. And I'm going to firmly bring those together. And with a little bit of Zen sort of concentration, I'm just going to do these stitches. I'm just doing the stitches on this needle. I'm not worried about the other 2. Wherever they go, however they twist, whatever's happening to them, I'm just working on these needles. And so you would start doing your knit 2, purl 2 right onto these needles. And when you come to the end of the first half, you'll be ready to switch needles. So what will happen is I will run out of stitches in my left hand and I'll be ready to move to the next needle. So here we go. Here's the last 2. 1, 2, and the needle in my left, the needle in my left hand comes free. Okay. Turn one section around. So you rotate the next section, here is the next section. You finished with a purl, so you're going to start with a knit. So I get my working yarn in position. If I'm knitting, it's behind. We're all attached now. And I place my now free needle into that stitch knitwise. I carry my working yarn around it. I'm ignoring this needle. It's just, you have to be sort of a Buddhist about it. You have to just ignore it. And we're going to knit two, purl two, knit two. Please stop by me. And now I've stopped having finished a knit two. So I'm going to have to start with a purl two on the next one. So if that happens to you, it's all right. Just bring your yarn forward, ready to purl. Put your now free needle into the first stitch of the new section, and then firmly purl the first one, and then with normal tension, purl the second one, and then continue to the end of the round. So by having half of the stitches at the beginning, I can tell which part of the sock I'm on. 1, 2, 3, 4. Apparently I have an extra stitch. Is that? Yeah, I cast on an extra stitch. Oh well. I would have to go back and fix that. And so then you would just continue going around. Every time you come back to the half stitch, you know you're starting a new round. So that's how to set up a sock in double pointed needles. If we're setting up a sock on long circular needles, so you can see I have a long circular needle. I've cast on the total number of stitches, and this time I'm going to separate them in a different way. I'm going to separate them only in half. There's only going to be two sides, and one will be the top and one will be the bottom. So again, I cast on 24 stitches, so I'm going to just count off by threes, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24. Good. 9, 12. So there's my halfway point. And what I do is I slide those onto the cable. I bend the cable to come through at that point. And just like we did before, I want to recognize that all of the stitches are on the inside, like we did before. I want my working yarn and my tail in the upper right-hand corner. So I want to move it so that if they're not there when I start, that's where they are now. So there's my tail and my working yarn. And with a very similar kind of thing, what I'm going to do is I think about this little rectangle. My working yarn and my tail are attached to the upper right-hand corner. And what I want to do with these stitches is I want to push the needle cable in until those stitches are also on the needle. I want to do that before I do anything with the back needle. So I always get the front stitches onto the needle before I do anything with the back needle. Once they're in position, I hold down and I pull out the back needle, and you're going to see there's a loop on the left and now there's a loop on the right. So it's like Mickey Mouse ears. I'm going to have two loops. And now, this is the magic part. My first stitch, again, I don't want to knit with my tail. I want to knit with so there's my tail. So we can get rid of that. I want to knit my first stitch. If I knit my first stitch, I want to move my working yarn out of the way above the cable like this. So I'm just laying it over the cable. I'm going to get my stitches to the end of the needle. And this stitch needs to be nearby to the stitch that we cast. The last stitch we cast on has to be next to the first stitch that we cast on once we join in the round. So what's going to happen is I'm going to hold them physically close to each other as I knit the first stitch. So it's kind of like what we did with the double points. I put my needle in and I pull the working yarn. So the reason I brought the working yarn up and over this cable was when I pull it, I don't want it to wrap around. So if it had gone behind the cable, if it had gone under the cable and it wrapped around, that would make an extra stitch. So I don't want to do that. I want it to come from straight from that stitch around to this stitch. So it's not wrapping around and making a new stitch. So there's my first stitch, knit one, knit two, and then I'm back on track, knitting and purling. So that's how you get your stitches joined for double pointed needles or magic loop. Once you've done the first half of the stitches, so again, this would represent the first half of the stitches of your sock, or the top of your sock is how I usually think of it. When you come to the end, just like you do with the double pointed needles, this needle comes free. So now I have this big long needle. To keep myself from getting tangled, I pull the stitch around so that my working yarn and my last stitch that I worked goes back to that upper right-hand corner, and I pull the yarn up over the needle. I then push the front needle into position. So I turn first, move the yarn out of the way. I push, it's not my favorite needles, but I just grabbed my longest eights. I push my stitches onto the front needle so that they're back in position. And then I pull the back needle out so that I have my two loops again. And then I do the same thing. And I ended with purl two, so I'm going to start with knit two. And for this, the two sides should be identical, except when you start doing increases or decreases around the heel shaping. Or in case there's differences between the top of the foot. In this particular pattern, there are differences between the top of the foot and the bottom of the foot, but no differences on the front or the back of the leg. So for this part of it, everything is identical. Okay. Now, see how loose that is there? I am not worried about it. You should not be worried about it either. So even if there seems to be a lot of looseness here, and I also split a stitch, so I'm going to fix that. Even if there seems to be a lot of looseness here, let's just fix my split stitch. There we go. The trick is, again, you make the turn, you push your front stitches back onto the needle. And the reason we do this is if you pull the back needle out before the front stitches are in position, you can get rid of the loop altogether. And then you have to find it again and you have to count your stitches and it takes more time and nobody wants to do that. So I've got my front needle in position. I still have this sort of longish looking thing here, but I'm going to pull a little bit on my tail and I'm going to pull a little bit on my working yarn. I'm going to pull my back needle out, ready to knit. And I want to make sure I'm coming from, again, that my working yarn gets, if I'm knitting, I always lay it over. If I'm purling, if I were going to purl this stitch, then I would want the yarn to come underneath. But when I'm knitting, I want it to be up over. Okay, so to make sure that that is tight enough, I pull very firmly on that first stitch, and that should prevent, and then I resume normal tension as I go. And now you can see that even though that was loose a second ago, that looseness has gone away. And you're back to working in the round on your ribbing. For this pattern, the ribbing calls for 30 rounds, which is a lot. It's 2.5 inches, and I am not somebody who likes to do 2.5 inches of ribbing, but I am making them as a gift for my husband, so I may suck it up and do 2.5 inches of ribbing because he might like it. But there you go. There's working in the round on magic loop and working in the round on double points. All right, next. We've talked a little bit, Stephen talks a little bit about changing the leg length if you'd like to make a shorter sock. So I'll just show you on the photo of the sock where we're talking about again. The leg length that he's saying that you can change. Please focus. That's better. Okay, the leg length that he's talking about are these repeats here. So if you want this to be 7 inches or 4 inches or 2 inches, this is the way that it's written. It's 2.5 inches of ribbing, and then I don't know how long this is, but he's suggesting this be like 12 repeats of or 7 repeats of the pattern. So I don't think the sample sock is as long as the pattern is written. That's interesting. But this is completely up to you. So if there is a length that you like for your sock to be above your heel, that's how long you want to make this sock. And if you like 1 inch of ribbing, you only have to do 1 inch of ribbing. You do not have to do 2.5 inches. I would not recommend doing much less than 1 inch of ribbing because it does give some stability to the beginning of the sock. Okay. So the next thing that I want to talk about with you is to take a look at the pattern repeat. There's a couple of things that are very important in this. The first is, so it gives you the cast-ons, and then it tells you to repeat the last round 30 more times or until the ribbing measures approximately 2.5 inches. And I make a note of how many rows or rounds of ribbing I do. So do make a note here. And the reason I note how many is I'm making 2 socks and I want them to match. I do like to identify the size that I'm doing. And then I like to point out some, important pieces of information. And the first is that for this sock, on this side, round 1 is here, and round 2 is here. And all of us in the class this morning needed to have round 2 pointed out to us by somebody because I was thinking we did this and we went straight into the pattern repeat, but there are 2 rounds. And the other thing I want you to notice is that it's using the contrast color. So in the beginning, we're using a main color. And for the main color, I'm going to use a different color. I'm going to use green. So using a main color. So I like to have colored markers to help me stay on track. And then you could, highlight this. So then when I get done with these 2 rows, I'm going to start my pattern repeat. And the pattern repeat uses the main color. So you could, just highlight the round is the main color, and then you're going to change to the contrast color for 5 and 6 and go back to the main color for 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then you're going to go to the contrast color for 5 and 6. So I like to just I think it helps just to pay attention to your pattern, to note where color changes are, and to make a visible sign. So you can see the pattern here is 4 rounds, sorry, of main color, 2 rounds of contrast color, 4 rounds of main color, 2 rounds of contrast color. And you can see we've done 30 rounds of main color and 2 rounds of contrast color. So the contrast color is always coming in 2 round sections. The other thing that's really helpful to note is that this is not all the same. It looks similar. Slip 2 with yarn and back, knit 8, slip 2 with yarn and back. That's going to turn out to look like slip 2 with yarn and back, knit 8, slip 4 with yarn and back, knit 8 until you get to the other end of the half or the needle that you're on. But then notice that here it's purl. So slip 2 knit, slip 2 8, purl 8, purl 8, purl 8. So this is an important thing for the pattern, that it's knit in the first round, and then in the subsequent 3 rounds, which are identical, it's purled. So please pay attention to that, the difference between the purls and the knits. And the same thing happens here. They're knit there, and then they're purled here. So this is just, to me, this is a distinction that I think it's important to see. And then the last thing I want to point out is that the pattern for the cable changes. So you have here, so the pattern repeat is just 12 stitches. And when you come to rounds 5 and 6, you do a cable, and then in the subsequent round, you knit all the stitches. So in round 5, the cable section is a cable 4 front, knit 4, cable 4 back. And that is very different from here, where we have cable 2 and then 2 cables next to each other, cable 4 back, cable 4 front, and then knit 2. So by color coding my pattern repeat, I'm just taking some focused time to look at this pattern and to say, oh, look, main color, it changes here. These are the places that you'll have to rip back and fix if you don't pay attention to them as you're going. So I really think it's important to, even if you don't use colored highlighters to the degree that I do, I think it's really important to pay attention to what's going on in your pattern. All right. The other thing that I want to talk about is just to demonstrate 2 of the stitches. How are we doing? We're right on the hour. So I'm going to just plug on, and I'm going to do this on this sample. So I'm just going to keep knitting back and forth. We're going to go back to this camera. So for this one, what I want to show you, so I'm going to just keep pretending that I'm working this in the round. 3, 6, 12, and I have just over 12 stitches here, so it's perfect. So when you get to round 1, sorry, when you get when you get to the first round of the leg, you want to change color. So I'm going to change color to purple to get my purple back in order. And to do that, to change color, all you need to do is start knitting, leaving a tail of 6 or so inches. You're just going to start knitting as directed. And in this case, we're going to knit 6 and make 1. So I'm making size 2 and it tells me to knit 6, make 1. So I'm going to knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then to make 1, I'm going to take my working yarn around my pointer finger so it's making a loop. And then I'm just going to tighten up on that. And that makes a nice snug new stitch. And then I'm going to knit 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to repeat that all the way across all of my stitches. So I take my pointer finger under the working yarn and twist it, catching the point on the loop, and then I just tighten it up. That can be called the backwards loop, the reverse loop, the backwards E. It's a nice cast on that's kind of unnoticeable. There's a little bit of space underneath it. So it's not completely invisible. All right, so then in the next row, and this is round 2 for all sizes, he does not give any particular instruction for this, but I do think that it works really nicely if when you get to those stitches, if you don't knit with your tail. So I'm going to knit to that 7th stitch. And you can see it looks a little bit different. It's a little bit twisted. So to keep that in place, so if I knit into the front of it, it kind of untwists it a little bit. I want to knit into the back of it. And that keeps it kind of tighter and it reduces the amount of space there. You don't have to do it. He doesn't tell you to do it, but I've just been doing a sweater where I have cast-ons in every row, and I found that that has been really helpful in keeping those cast-ons from looking too loose. So as you come to that one, if you can't easily get into the back of the stitch, you can go purlwise into the front of the stitch and then go underneath, or purlwise into the front of the stitch and swizzle your needles around until your right needle is behind, ready to knit through the back. Okay, so now I've done my 2 rows of color work. I just want to demonstrate the slip 2 and the cables. So as you go to the next round, you'll be changing back and your main color will be right there to pick up. And you're going to you're going to slip with yarn and back and then purl. Sorry, I'm looking at round 2. You're going to slip with yarn and back 2 stitches and then knit 8 and then slip with yarn and back 2 stitches. And you'll repeat that to the end of the round. So what that ends up meaning is that in the middle of the round, you might have, so I've slipped 2 with the yarn and back, and now I'm going to knit 8. So your working yarn is going to be attached it's going to be attached to the last stitch you knitted, and you're going to slip 2, and then you're going to repeat it right away, which means you're going to slip 2 more. And then you're going to knit 8 again. I don't have enough stitches on here, but I just want to show you that that's what's happening with this, that you're going to slip 2 in the middle of these rows. You'll slip 2 and then you'll start the next repeat. And that means you're slipping 4 all together in the center. only 2 at the ends, but 4 at the center. I want you to consider this like working stranded color work, that you need to leave a long enough float of the main color yarn behind the slip stitches of the contrast color. So moving them down the needle or otherwise altering the length of this float to make it a little bit longer is going to be helpful. So you can see if I stretch it up like that, it's longer than those stitches are wide. And then I would go into that. So I might pinch that together there as I make that first stitch so it doesn't get too loose. And I noticed when I was doing this and I was purling the next stitch that I had a tendency to pull tighter on that. So I just want to say you don't want to pull too tight. So that's the first round. And then we go back and we're going to do the same thing. It's slipped again. And then it's purled. So you're not working with you're only working with the main color at this point. So, and you're purling. So this is where my advice about leaving enough comes in. So as you get to the end of this and you're going to slip the next 4 stitches, and then you're going to resume purling. So slip, 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 slip. Oh, make sure your yarn, I didn't do it. Make sure your yarn is on the correct side of the stitches. So I was purling, my yarn was in front. I need to move it to the back when I slip my stitches. And then I need to move it back to the front. Because you're weaving it in from front to back, there's a tendency to pull that float tighter. So don't pull it so tight or try and consciously make it a little bit looser, but I pinch here so that I'm not pulling on it as I make the next 2 stitches. Okay, so I just want to show you the cable before we're done. The C4B or C4F cable, again, they come in different configurations in round 5 or round 6. I'm going to do the round 5 configuration. And what it's going to be at the beginning of the round is it's going to be a slip of it's going to be a cable that involves the 2 stitches of contrast color with the first 2 stitches of main color. And then you'll work 4 stitches, and then it will be the first 2 stitches of contrast color and the last 2 stitches of contrast color and the first 2 stitches of main color. So let's just see what that looks like. I'm going to use another double pointed needle to hold my stitches for the cabling. But I also do this without a cable needle. So this first one, it's cable. So C4F is a cable for front. So with another needle, I'm going to hold these to the front and I'm going to knit 2 stitches. Let me just double check that. Yes, I knit the stitches from, and I am using the contrast color. So here I'm using only the purple. So I'm going to knit the next 2. And then I'm going to knit the 2 from my cable needle. So I could just slide those, get rid of that cable needle. I'm just going to slide those onto the end of my left needle. It's a little fiddly here. And then we're going to knit those. So that's a cable 4 front. And you can see if I were holding those two sets of needles next to each other, if my fingers were stitches 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, by holding it to the front and working these stitches first, I'm making a left leaning cross. I'm going to do it again and show you, and if I'm going to hold them to the back, so I slip the first 2 stitches 1 and 2 to a cable needle, I hold them to the back, and then I work the stitches 3 and 4. That's a right leaning cross. So now I'm going to work across 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches, and that will take me to the other side, the last 2 stitches of my main color and the first 2 stitches of my contrast again. So I'm going to use my cable. I can use my cable needle, or I could also not use my cable needle. This is a back cross. If I were not using my cable needle, I would, if it's supposed to go behind, so cable 4 behind, C4 behind, I would want to take my right needle and go into stitches 3 and 4 and slide stitches 1 and 2 off, and then put them immediately back on. So I'm going to just do that again. And I'm very cautiously doing this. It's maybe not a car thing to do. It's maybe not a wine thing to do or an after dinner thing. This is maybe for focused knitting. So again, for cable 4 behind, I go into the fronts of the 2 stitches that I want to cross to the front of. And I remove the needle from the back and then immediately slide them into stitches 1 and 2. And then to knit into them, I do have to put them back onto the left needle. But now they're ready to be knitted into. And I can keep going. And then these would be switched again. So having done that, these would be switched. So let's just show that. So I would go behind. So this is a front cross. So I want these stitches to stay in front. So I put my needle to the back and slide these out, put my needle back into the fronts of those stitches, and then slide them back onto the left needle, and then continue working across. And that's, so I did not do all of the garter rows or all of the reverse stockinette rows of that, but you can see here. And then there's going to be another row of the contrast color. So that's round 5. And then there would be another round of the contrast color to have 2 rounds underneath. But that's how the pattern is going to get done. And then you can see that it makes these little sort of half moon shapes as you go. I think it's a really neat pattern. I'm looking forward to working on this further. If you have any questions, feel free to call. The store number is 216-230-9224, or send an email to info@aroundthetableyarns.com. Just put sock club question, and I will get back to you as quickly as I can. So your homework for the month of October, we're meeting again on November 3rd, and by November 3rd, we would like to start on page 4 with the heel. So I'm hoping that everybody can work to the end of the instructions on page 4 of page 3 to the end of the leg, whatever length you want to make your leg. If you finish that and you have time, start your second sock. I do recommend doing both at the same time and having a second sock on the needles. So the heel flap and gusset start on page 4, and we're going to do that in November and see how far we get with it. So I hope everybody get something out of today's video, and I'm going to pause the recording and try and at least play the entirety of Stephen West's audio for people to hear. Thanks so much.
Greetings from Amsterdam all the way to Ohio. I'm really excited to see all your sock progress. You chose a really good pair of socks. The Stony Stream socks are really simple and relaxing, but they've got just enough technique to keep you interested. So I hope you make it through the cuff and the leg and get to that finished toe. And my top tips for making these socks is as soon as you finish the first one, if you're making one sock at a time, cast on the second one right away. If you don't cast on the second one, you might never cast it on, and then you'll have some mismatched socks in your future. So as soon as you finish that first sock, at least just cast on the cuff and knit one round of the next sock just to get it on your needles, and that makes it easier to pick it up and knit a few rounds. But I'm really curious to see all your color combos that you've chosen. It's a really fun pattern with just that solid main color and the self-striping accent. It's enjoyable to watch those color changing yarns, or you could get a variegated, a very splashy color for that contrast color. So please send me some photos and progress. I'd love to see a big photo of all your socks out on the table and of you knitting together at the shop there in Ohio. So keep me updated. And lastly, when you're picking your size, there's a lot of sizes in the pattern. You can knit as many pattern repeats as you like. So remember that the pattern is just a guideline and you can make your own customizations. So if you want really, really short ankle socks, just knit fewer leg pattern repeats and you can customize that foot length as well. So have fun, support each other, and keep me updated with all of your colorful progress.